think my wife's starting to write like me. Oh no, it can't be a good thing. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is start to tell you the story of the New Deal. The New Deal was the Roosevelt administration anti-depression program to solve and fix the problems of the Great Depression. Now, the New Deal is a very difficult thing to present. It's one of the longest programs in the history of the United States, and that has to do with the fact that Franklin Roosevelt, of course, is president for more than 2 terms. It stretches all the way really from 1933 until after 1942 in some degree, so makes it long in that particular regard. Most presidencies are only going to last 8 years. It is also there's so much going on. There are so many activities that occurred during the New Deal that it becomes hard to kind of figure it out. There's also a weird kind of chronology to the New Deal, that there are periods of activity, intense activity, and then a quiet period, and then intense activity, and then a quiet period. So it just has a whole bunch of issues to make it difficult to present, So what has to happen when you have a complicated, multifaceted activity like the New Deal, you have to create an artificial structure to it. I have to make a way for me to understand it first off, and I have to make a way that I can communicate it to you and hopefully help you to understand it also. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use what I call the 3 R's, and I need to tell you I did not invent this. This was from Otis Graham, my professor that I had at the UC Santa Barbara. But he used the 3 R's kind of concept, and I really think that it works in a very effective way. So we're looking at 3 words that begin with the letter R. You guys know that I kind of like alliterations, dichotomies and stuff like that, okay? Anyway, 3 words that begin with the letter R that can tell us kind of what the major foci of the New Deal was. What were they trying to do as far as their various activities? So our first R is recovery. One of the major activities on the part of the New Deal was to do everything they could to recover the American economy. They're going to primarily do this through what we call government planning and intervention. Government planning and intervention. You picture a private sector that's kind of scared and run away and hidden, and so the government has to step in to be the guiding light to begin to generate economic activity as much as they can. So a huge effort on the part of the New Deal was to promote economic recovery, get the economy going again, and that's a critical part. The second R in terms of this, the 3 R's, is relief. So relief is the great humanitarian expression of the New Deal. There were people who are at great risk at this moment, people who are dying on the streets. There was basically a humanitarian crisis. And the New Deal said we must do something about it. This isn't going to be like Hoover, with the Hoovervilles. Franklin Roosevelt said we must do something about it. So I want to tell you what it was that the New Deal will try to do to help those that were in need in one way or the other. Relief is sometimes considered part of recovery because what you're doing in some ways is getting money into the hands of those that need it. And of course they're going to spend it, and the hope is that that would then generate economic growth. But remember, this is basically the humanitarian effort of the New Deal to try to help those in need. And then the final, and in many ways most important R of the 3 R's is reform. So the New Deal sought to fix the problems that had led to the Great Depression. Franklin Roosevelt was at heart a progressive. He was born and raised politically in the progressive era. So what he's going to try to do is fix these problems. They're not going to just say, oh, that's too bad, but let's move ahead. Let us do everything we can to fix the problem so that this will never happen again. That becomes the ultimate kind of notion as far as reform is concerned. And reform has the enduring kind of impact that it still is with us even. These activities are still with us even to this day. So what I want to do is I want to show you those issues that were associated with the recovery, those issues that are associated with relief, and then those issues that are associated with reform. And we're going to start with recovery, because recovery is kind of the first area that the New Deal really began to focus on. I have to tell you, they did a lot of things. They move in almost every single area at the very beginning, but recovery is the first area that we're going to kind of focus our attention on, okay? So the idea was government planning and intervention to get the government involved in the economy to help to stimulate economic growth. And what they did was they looked in the first instance to the most long-suffering area of the economy, an area that had really been in trouble for a long time, dating all the way back to the end of World War I. And so the first place the New Deal is going to focus its attention on, I wonder if you guys were paying attention before, to what would be the most long-suffering area of the economy. And if you said agriculture, you're right. Congratulations. There's no prize to be gained, but still, just the knowledge that you knew what I was going to talk about. So what they did was they created, and I have to let you guys know that almost all of these are identifications, okay? And tragically for us, they're kind of long-winded in terms of their title. So the first one I'm going to address to you is called the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. the New Deal will come up with so many agencies that they had to kind of manage, and these, especially these long-winded ones. So routinely they used acronyms. So I will say it, and I'll use them for all of them. This will be generally known to us as the AAA. That's what everybody would know of, the AAA. And the AAA was created in 1933 as part of the 100 Days legislation. So whenever it's part of the 100 Days legislation, I'm going to make a point of it, and you could then include like that acronym when you're doing your 100 Days identification. AAA, 100 Days, 100 Days legislation. So the AAA was designed to promote government planning and intervention. Of course, this is the continuing theme of all government recovery in the general area of agriculture. Farmers were hurting, farmers were in trouble, and so the AA was going to step in to try to do what they could to help the farmers. What they're going to do is they are going to offer to the, I did put that in the right place. First of all, three things that I'm going to highlight to you that the AA was going to do. One of them was to offer to the farmer low interest rate loans. It's a classic kind of way of dealing with this. Farmers are struggling economically, they just need a little bit of help. So offer them a loan that is relatively easy to repay, of course, and this would be at least step one in trying to promote their well-being. Okay, so not necessarily a really radical kind of initial solution to the agricultural situation, but they were going to do more, and every time they did something more, it's a little bit more radical. So here we go. The AAA decided it would offer its services to basically work as an agent for the farmers, to help the farmers. And that meant that the AA would buy their crops from, if there's no one else to buy them, the government steps in to basically buy the crops. The AA would help them sell their crops, acts as a marketing agent, of course, and oftentimes taking it and dumping it abroad or someplace else to kind of get it out of the way, or storing it. The AA would simply work as a storage function where they would then hold the crops until the price would begin to improve or something like that. But here's the AA acting as an essential agent for the farmer to help them to increase the chances, of course, of their economic recovery. The last thing I'm going to tell you they did was really the most radical by far. So here's the problem. American farmers have always overproduced the marketplace. And it's good for us because they're so good at what they do that lowers our food price. I mean, it's almost always like a glut as far as food is concerned, and it lowers our food prices. I think in the United States today, we use about 7% of our income to buy our food. In France, before the French Revolution, it's like 70% of their income. I mean, food was the most important expense of these people. And yet for us, it's a minimal kind of thing. And in some ways, that's a problem, right? That our food is so incredibly cheap, and that could lead to things like obesity. We have way too much access to way too much food. But the farmers have always had a problem that they're outproducing the marketplace, and what that does is it creates a glut, and that means the price is going to go lower. Now everyone knows that the solution is to create scarcity. If there is less of the crop, of the product there, then of course they'll become scarce and the value is going to increase. The only problem was that they could never do this voluntarily. One farmer over here says, okay, I'm going to cut back on production and try to increase scarcity, and then this farmer over here increases production, of course, and mitigate or negates anything that the other farmer might have done. If they're going to do this, you have to do it across the board, of course, and yet the farmers could never find a way to voluntarily do this. Well, the AAA was going to convince them to do that, and the way they did it was by the offering of crop subsidies. And what it really was that the AAA would pay the farmers not to farm. They're going to pay these guys not to farm. And what you do then, of course, is you're going to create an artificial scarcity, which will help to improve farm prices, which hopefully will help to increase farm revenues and farm income. So this was the way that they were going to deal with this. In the beginning, the program was really straightforward and highly destructive. The idea was to simply go out and reduce agricultural productivity by 40%. And so this was like the first image of the AA, these guys that were like the agents of destruction. They would go to a farm, and let's say it's a wheat farmer, and they would tell the wheat farmer, I want you to plow under 40% of your crop out there. And he would then watch the guy take his plow and plow it under, and then he'd give him a check. Or they would go to a dairy and they'd say, I want you to dump all this milk on the ground. Or they would go to an orchard and I want you to shake all the trees until the fruit falls down, And they did things like they even killed little piglets and stuff like that. I mean, these are agents of destruction to create an artificial scarcity. And of course, highly controversial, as you can imagine. And there were all these jokes about, I'm going to become a farmer so I can be paid not to farm, that kind of thing. And by the way, crop subsidies they have a presence even in our society today, in our economy today. Anyway, they did what they were supposed to. They created an artificial scarcity. And the reality was, that farm prices did begin to go up for the first time since World War I. And the AA was able to generate a painfully slow, but still something of a recovery. You know, the agricultural economy began this really slow recovery, and this is exactly what they wanted to do. Some of these things are more complicated than I can tell you. The AA was challenged in the courts, was declared unconstitutional, will be reintroduced as something called the little AA, and sometimes, you know, I don't want you to have to worry about that. You know, we're looking at what the agency was designed to do and what it ultimately will do more than any of the little particulars. But the idea was to promote recovery in the economy, and the AA actually had that kind of end result. Not everything the New Deal did, of course, you know, worked, and so that was the point I was trying to make, this hit and miss kind of dynamic. So here was something that really didn't work, and it was called the National Recovery Administration, better known as the NRA. They're always going to use their acronyms, and of course that's not the NRA of today, that's the NRA of the 1930s. It was created in 1933 and acted in 1933 as part of the 100 Days legislation. So if you're doing your identification for the 100 days, you could throw the NRA, you know, and believe me, the acronym's all I'm looking for right there, okay? So the NRA was an attempt to try to do, you know, same kind of government planning intervention, though without now in the industrial economy. And the idea was to have a series of codes that would amp up production, increase employment, increase productivity, increase prices, you know, for all of these. And it was a highly complex and ultimately overwhelmingly confusing situation, which ended up being a boondoggle and a failure. And I got to tell you, it ultimately was declared unconstitutional. So this, you know, here's a big major effort, big propaganda effort. The Blue Eagle was their symbol, and the Blue Eagle would be put in the business windows, and they would have parades and all this kind of stuff that they would do to promote the NRA, and ended up being, you know, really unsuccessful. Not everything the New Deal is going to work. There's a lot of things that are fairly signal failures, to say the least. Much more beneficial, much more promoting recovery than the NRA was something called the TVA. So here, excuse me, I should have told you, the Tennessee Valley Authority, better known as the TVA. Was created, enacted in 1933 as part of the 100 Days legislation. So again, we see that kind of, you know, in that mass of early legislation, this was also something that came out in that very early time. So the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, was designed to promote they put it right here, what I'm going to call a regional recovery. So we're looking at the Tennessee River Valley area, and I have to tell you that it's got a kind of a lot of unique characteristics which are just important for what they were trying to do here. I can kind of point to it on the map for you guys. It's so weird whenever I look in you guys see my map on that's what side it is. But the Tennessee River Valley goes through a lot of states. It goes through a little bit of North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, of course. It's going to hit the corner of Mississippi, right over here, a little bit of Alabama, up through Tennessee, and then finally through Kentucky on its way to the Ohio River. Now, the valley area was a troubled area. This was an old cotton-producing area that was not doing very well, to say the least. And the TVA was designed to come into this poor region and regenerate it, you know, promote economic recovery in that particular area. Now, the way the TVA would do this was by creating what you could call, and I'm going to call, a multi-purpose planning and development agency. So they're going to try to do a lot of things, all with the idea of taking this poor region and regenerating as much as they possibly can, you know, promoting economic growth and recovery in that particular area. So they're going to do a lot of different things. Let me give you a sense of the kind of things that they were doing. Now, one thing that happened, there was a problem in the area, was that the Tennessee River was notorious for flooding. It would flood routinely, almost annually. And, you know, I'm a Southern Californian, I'm assuming you guys live here too, and, you know, so much of, we're not really, that's not our thing. We have flash floods, those are really dangerous, right? But the generalized flooding that can occur when a big river overflows its banks and levees and the entire area is underwater. I mean, that is a freaky kind of thing. You know, I don't think that can happen where I live. We live on an alluvium and there's no place where you're going to generate that much water, you know, but you know, this is something that happens kind of routinely in other parts of our country, especially the American South. So the Tennessee River was notorious for flooding and, of course, the damage and the death that was brought by this river. I think it's the Yangtze River, which one? One of the big Chinese rivers. It's called China's Sorrow, you know, because it floods and it's caused so much damage, although it's also critically important for so much about China too. But Tennessee River was notorious for its flooding. So the idea, part of what the TVA was going to do was create a massive flood control project, which included the building of dams on the river. Indeed, they would build 18 dams on the Tennessee River, 18 dams, which made the Tennessee River the most dammed river in the whole damn nation. I wait all semester to get to say that particular sentence. Really, the Tennessee River is not even a river, it's like linked reservoirs or something like that. And so, I want you to know that this is going to be, powerful for the economy. And it's not only going to improve just life, of course, so you're not going to have to face the kind of continual flooding. But if you're building 18 dams, I'm sure you guys know that that means that there's going to be a whole lot of jobs that are going to be generated in the area. I should have begun with this, but I always hope that in some way you could figure out a way to be listening to me and to be watching or looking at the PowerPoint at the same time, because I include, pictures of what's happening as far as the Tennessee Valley Authority is concerned. You can see them building and constructing the dams as far as the slide is concerned. But this was a big part of the TVA to build these dams, create flood control, but also create a massive number of jobs. Now, whenever you make dams on a river, you create the potential for something else that can be very good for the economy, and of course that is hydroelectricity. So the TVA became a massive hydroelectric power project. I want you to know that the TVA continues to exist to this day. Disassociated with the federal government, is now a utility company for the area. But having all these dams allowed them to create cheap hydroelectricity for the people of the area and thus improve their lives in a variety of ways. And the electricity, of course, ultimately became the foundation for the last part of the last component of the TVA, and that was to use that cheap electricity to attract business and industry to the area. And I got to tell you, this worked. I mean, it really did improve the area. It brought jobs, it brought cheap electricity, it attracted new businesses into the area, and it promoted the very kind of recovery that it was intended to do. And so a very successful program, and you would think that it would be replicated in other areas, and at least there was a suggestion that that would happen, but they don't do it anymore. And they don't do it because although it was successful, it was a little too much government. So it's a little too socialist, Americans can take only so much government intervention before they become somewhat troubled by it. And in the case of the TVA, even though it was successful, there were too many Americans who really thought, nah, I think we're going a little too far there. So this was never replicated, even though it was a very successful program to promote recovery. Now, there were many other agencies that were designed to promote recovery, but I want to kind of jump to the chase here. All recovery activities of the New Deal were underwritten by, first of all, monetary policy. So monetary policy is simply, dealing with money and the interest rate. And of course, what Roosevelt did was he got the Fed to lower interest rates to a point, of course, where it would be much easier to get loans for those who needed it to sustain them, and to increase the money supply. So from the monetary crunch of the nadir period, we're going to see an expansion, of course, both in terms of availability to money because of low interest rates, but also expanding the money supply. And if you look on the PowerPoint slideshow, you see actually what happens to the money, the dip down, and then the increase in the money supply that will follow the coming of the New Deal. So, and for the monetarists, this is critical. You guys all know the people that believe that the Fed is this, the end all of the economy. Whenever you need help, you dial the interest rate down, right? To make sure that there's more money available so we can buy homes, invest in our businesses, and do the things that we need, of course, to grow the economy. So underlying everything was a monetary policy that made money easier for people to get their hands on. And then, of course, there was also the New Deal's fiscal policy. Fiscal policy involves government spending. So one thing that the New Deal kind of understood was that the government is going to have to spend money to stimulate the economy. In the face of a private sector that seemed to be petrified and unable to do anything, there needed someone else to step into the situation to try to promote economic growth. And so the government would begin to embark upon a campaign that is called compensatory counter-cyclical fiscal policy. That's a mouthful right there for you. Compensatory counter-cyclical fiscal policy. So compensatory means to compensate for the lack of private sector investment in a counter-cyclical way. So the business cycle, the cyclical decline situation is where you can't sell your product, so you have to cut overhead, so you fire your workers. But if you fire workers, they can't consume, so that you have more of your product. You cycle downward, of course. So this is counter-cyclical. Hire more workers to consume more goods, so you can hire more workers to consume more goods, to cycle the economy upward instead of downward. And so the idea was to use government spending to prime the pump to get. John Maynard Keynes was the primary advocate of this, and it's called Keynesianism, that the government spending could actually become a monumental stimulus to promote recovery in a time when, of course, the private sector is unwilling to do this. Now, of course, to do this, there's certain issues. You're going to increase government spending, but they couldn't increase taxation at this time. The nation is hurting, right? So you have to deficit spend. You've got to spend money that you don't have. You have to borrow money to spend. But the base concept idea was that you deficit spend now, you borrow the money to spend now, but when the economy improves, then you can increase taxation and recoup your losses. You can build your revenues at that time. At some point in American history, you guys all know that our government will become addicted to deficit spending, and now we have this extraordinary, whatever it is, $22 trillion debt. Our nation owes as much as we make every single year. And I love whenever they put that into, they individualize it. Your portion of the debt is $298,000. Well, give me a minute, I'll write a check. Anyway, compensatory countercyclical fiscal policy or government spending to stimulate recovery became a component, of course, of the New Deal's efforts in terms of recovery. So the first major activity, of course, of the New Deal was to promote recovery, and they're going to do it. And I'm going to highlight, the outcome of this at some point, of course. But understand that there's an upward dynamic, though painfully slow, in terms of the economic recovery. The second R is relief. So this was the great humanitarian effort of the New Deal to try to help those in need, to help those that were homeless, to help those that were hungry, to try to uplift them in some kind of way, but also to help recover the economy by making sure that everyone was consuming, had something that they could consume that could become an economic stimulus to the economy. So I want to tell you the kind of things that they did in terms of relief. Now, the very first act of relief was something called the Federal Emergency Relief Administration. And the Federal Relief Administration is not a potential identification, but it is, there's not quite enough here to go around, but I do want you to have a sense that this is something that they would do. So this was passed in 1933, I think it was probably known as FERA. It was part of the 100 Days legislation, so another thing that is happening, kind of right off the bat. The thing that's impressive to me about this, reason I want to tell you about it, Congress appropriated $500 million. And the kind of critical thing of that moment was that is the largest check our government had ever written up until that point. They'd never written a check quite that large. And this was going to be $500 million to go to the state and local governments so that they could give that money, they use that money to help those who are suffering, to help those that were in need. And there will be, of course, follow-up checks that will be associated with that. But here's the government simply saying there are people at risk. The New Deal is saying there's people at risk and we need to reach out our hand and we need to help them as quickly as we possibly can. Of course, when we've just seen recently, of course, there's going to be kind of a relief act that's coming here, is coming down the pike, I guess, which will provide, of course, those that are in need at least some kind of additional income to help get them through our difficult time. Same basic notion here, okay? Let's get these people through it if we possibly can. So, here's the first thing that the New Deal will do. Now, the one thing that's interesting about this to me is that this is what we call direct relief. So direct relief means it's kind of like making a handout. If you're not giving the person money, you're giving them food or something like that. So this is a form of helping those that are in need. Now, Franklin Roosevelt was, by the standards of the day, a liberal. But he didn't like direct relief, There's an American attitude, and I think we all have it to some degree, that we don't think it's a good idea to give handouts, People should. There's a sense of individuality in our society. People should, try to take care of themselves and pull them up. And, if you are able to sustain yourself, then no way in hell do we want to give you any money, right? That's kind of the way, perspective, it's even something that I share. Even though we know that there are so many people that have jobs in America that still can't, afford housing and stuff like that, or healthcare, that's the sad part, that those people, if they're going to receive some kind of relief, it still does make sense in its own kind of way. It's our system and our economy that's kind of failing them. But believe it or not, even FDR was somewhat reluctant to give handouts, this kind of direct relief. So instead of giving direct relief, that's like just giving people money or something like that, he wanted to give them something that he thought was better for them and better for the society at large. What he wanted to give them was a job. And so the primary focus of the New Deal is not on direct relief, but it's on what we could call work relief. Work relief becomes the essential expression of the relief efforts as far as the New Deal is concerned. And the New Deal worked very, very hard to create jobs, which they could then give people, of course, which would benefit the individual, they thought, but it'll also benefit the larger society. And I need to get set up to tell you about the work relief agencies in just a second.